The snow crunches like shattered bone under my boots, each step a fresh fracture in the frozen silence. I jam the crowbar into the factory's frozen window, the glass yielding with a sickly front shatter that echoes like a bone snapping. Snow sprays inward, cold as a corpse's breath, as I snatch the bottle from the drift. It's cold, heavier than it should be, the glass vibrating with a trapped scream that resonates up my arm. I shove it onto the assembly line's rusted belt, the metal groaning under the weight. Instantly, the thousand-insect buzz syncs with the bottle's vibration, a high-pitched fundied whine that scrapes the inside of my skull like wasps trapped in glass. The sound is everywhere, inside the walls, inside the snow, inside the wooden table I'd been searching, where the heartbeat had been. Thump, 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 thump. Now it's gone, drowned by the buzz. I turn, boots sliding on the ice-slick floor, the factory's blackboard, gray walls streaked with chalk, dust, snow. The buzz escalates, sharpening into a shriek that cuts through the cold air, a sound like glass shattering from the inside. My ears ring, the noise of physical pressure behind my eyes. Then I see it, a clawed hand reaching from the shadows near the conveyor belt, fingernails like obsidian shards blacker than the void between stars, scraping against the bottle's glass. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The bottle trembles violently in my grip as the hand pulls it backward, vanishing into the darkness with a sound like 1,000 needles being dragged across ice. The buzz spikes, then cuts off abruptly, leaving only the echo of that tiff scrape in my head. I stumble back, boots slipping on the icy floor. The factory's air smells of old metal and frozen dust, thick as a wool blanket. My breath plumes in the moonlight, both sun and moon visible, casting twin shadows across the snow. The bottle's absence leaves a hollow space on the belt, the metal now cold and dead. The insect buzz is gone, replaced by a silence so deep it hums. I can hear my own heart pounding in my ears, a slow, heavy thud that echoes the table's lost rhythm. The cold seeps into my bones, a familiar ache from too many nights on the streets. But this is different. This is the cold of being buried alive. I glance down at the belt. The obsidian fingernail scrape is still there, on the glass now. A single, perfect line, deep enough to hold the echo of that final sharp scrape. It's the only mark left behind. The factory breathes around me, the shadows shifting like living things I can't move. The cold isn't just outside anymore. It's inside the bottle, inside the glass, inside the scrape. The silence presses in, thick as the snow outside, and for the first time since I started this job, I feel the weight of the earth closing in. The scrape on the glass is the last thing I see before the shadows swallow the factory whole. The drill's whine grates against my teeth, echoing like a dental instrument scraping bone marrow from inside my skull. I press harder into the splintered office table, its surface chalk, dust gray under the twin moonlight and sunlight filtering through the factory's broken windows. The bit chews into the wood with a wet crunchy, each rotation releasing an aroma of old pine and damp earth. Like unearthed coffin timbers, blood seeps from the hole I've drilled, mingling with the chalk dust on the floor in a macabre Rorschach test. It pools around my boots like ink spilling onto parchment, staining the concrete blackboard gray. The buzz that has taken up residence inside me, inside everything, increases its tempo to match the table's rhythmic thump-thump as blood seeps into the wood grain. My breath catches in my throat when I hear it, a heartbeat pulsing from within the table, steady and insistent beneath the drill's whine. It echoes through the factory like a distant drumbeat calling warriors to battle. The buzz harmonizes with this new rhythm, its pitch rising sharply until both sounds merge into an unholy chorus that vibrates in my chest. Sweat beads on my forehead despite the cold, dripping onto the tabletop and diluting the blood's crimson hue. Each droplet hits the wood like a tiny grenade pin being pulled, a festivus sound followed by a widening circle of red. The drill bit strikes something hard-bone, metal, and the table splits open with an audible crack, revealing a second, smaller table nestled within. This inner sanctum is scarred with ink stains that writhe like black worms under my gaze. They seem to pulsate in time with the heartbeat I now realize was coming from this hidden altar. The drill's whine falters as it chews into these new depths, sparks flying like embers against the chalk dust. The sound of blood dripping onto chalk dust of teet fufti tov takes on a symphonic quality, each note building upon the last until I'm enveloped in an auditory cathedral. The walls breathe around me, shadows shifting as if alive and watching my desecration with disapproval, or perhaps anticipation. I lean closer to examine the ink stains when suddenly the smaller table's legs snap under pressure like dry twigs. It tips forward, revealing nothing but empty space beneath. A void that seems to swallow all sound except for a single, resonant thun. The heartbeat is gone, replaced by an oppressive silence so deep it hums in my ears. The factory breathes out around me, shadows expanding and contracting like lungs filling with icy air. I can't move, can barely breathe, as the cold seeps into my bones once more, heavier this time. It is not just outside anymore, it is inside me, a chill that reaches for something deeper than flesh or bone. The silence presses in thick as the snow outside, and for the first time since entering this godforsaken place, I feel genuine fear clawing at my chest like an unseen hand trying to pull me into its icy grip. The echo of that final thuntum still resonates within me, a warning I don't dare ignore. Something ancient has awakened here tonight, and it is hungry for more than just screams in bottles. But there is no going back now. The path forward is clear as the chalk dust on my boots, dark and leading only deeper into this frozen hell. The shadow cat moved first, a flicker at the periphery, then a purposeful glide into the corridor. I followed, the toy camera clutched in my hand, its plastic casing cold against my palm. Each step I took echoed strangely, not with a reverberation of stone or brick, but a brittle free-crack, as my boots pressed into the frozen plastic flooring. A sound like the fracturing of brittle bones. The buzz within me intensified, a relentless drone harmonizing with the plastic's lament. It was a symphony of decay. The air tasted of something ancient and dry, like parchment left too long in the sun. I risked a glance at the camera's viewfinder, adjusting the focus. The factory stretched ahead, a skeletal labyrinth of rusted metal and shattered glass. Moonlight filtered through the eclipse, painted the corridors in an unsettling chiaroscuro, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the stagnant air. The cat didn't hurry, its form a shifting void against the gloom, absorbing the meager light rather than reflecting it. It possessed an unnatural stillness, an almost deliberate absence of movement that was more unsettling than any frantic dash. My breath hitched, a puff of vapor condensing in the frigid air. The factory seemed to hold its breath with me, a collective pause before something else. My hand tightened on the camera, a desperate anchor against the rising tide of disorientation. The historian in me, the detached observer, was dissolving, leaving only the detective. The man who chased shadows, who knew the taste of fear. We reached a mirrored wall. The surface was clouded with grime, reflecting a distorted version of the corridor, a funhouse mockery of reality. The cat paused, its silhouette a stark outline against the fractured reflections. Then it stepped forward, not through the mirror, but fordi into. It simply ceased to be. One moment, a shifting shadow, the next, nothing. The reflection vanished, leaving only the smear of my own face staring back at me, a ghost in the glass. The buzz in my skull spiked, a physical pain radiating from the base of my skull. My vision blurred, the mirrored corridor fragmenting into 1,000 distorted images. I blinked, trying to clear the haze, but the cat was gone. Utterly gone. No shimmer, no distortion, just empty space where it had been. I reached out, my fingers brushing the cold, grimy surface of the mirror. The reflection of my hand was there, solid and real, yet the cat remained absent. It hadn't passed through, it had ceased. A cold certainty settled in my gut. This wasn't a simple disappearance. This was something else. A tremor ran through the floor, a low vibration that resonated deep within my bones. The plastic beneath my feet tweet again, a chorus of brittle sighs. The air grew heavy, oppressive, as if the very walls were pressing in on me. I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the instinctive awareness of being watched, not by something twented in the factory, but something twin through. I rotated slowly, scanning the corridor. The shadows seemed to deepen, to coalesce into shapes that weren't there a moment before. The moonlight, already weak, seemed to dim further, swallowed by the encroaching gloom. The buzz became a roar, drowning out the footed crack of the plastic underfoot. Then, a visible fog began to gather on the mirror's surface, obscuring my reflection. It wasn't the condensation of moisture. It was something else, something colder, something sentient. It spread quickly, a creeping white tendril, consuming the mirrored surface. The distorted image of my face vanished, replaced by a swirling opacity. A single cold breath fogged the mirror, leaving a delicate tracery of condensation. It wasn't my breath. It was heavier, deeper, imbued with an alien chill that seeped into my skin. The air grew thick, suffocating. The factory held its breath again, waiting. The bottle felt cold, a shard of frozen history against my palm. The scream trapped within was a pressure against my skull, a silent detonation waiting to be transcribed. I positioned the quill, its nib scraping against the vellum, a dry, insistent whisper against the buzzing in my ears. The ledger lay open, its pages a field of expectant white. I began to write, painstakingly translating the scream into a series of Byzantine glyphs, each stroke a betrayal of the silence I craved. The ink flowed, not smoothly but with a viscous reluctance. It wasn't black, not precisely. It was the color of chalk dust mixed with something darker, something wrong. As the symbols formed, a wetness bloomed on the page, not the sheen of fresh ink, but something thicker, something clinging. The parchment wept as the ink bled, the letters dissolving into a chaotic swirl of gray and black. The buzzing intensified, vibrating through the bones of my hand, a relentless tremor that threatened to shatter the quill's fragile hold. I fought to maintain control, forcing my hand to continue its meticulous work. The air grew heavy, saturated with the scent of something ancient, something almost metallic, like iron filings left to rust in a forgotten cellar. The shadows deepened, pressing in on me, blurring the edges of the room. I risked a glance at the viewfinder, the camera's lens a cold, unblinking eye. The factory seemed to shift, the angles subtly altered, as if the very structure was rearranging itself around me. The glyphs coalesced, forming a phrase then another, until the page was a dense tapestry of Byzantine script. The wetness increased, the parchment swelling, the ink spreading like a malignant stain. I could feel the heat radiating from the ledger, a subtle warmth that belied the glacial chill of the factory. The buzzing reached a fever pitch, a physical pain that threatened to overwhelm me. Then, the edges of the ledger began to glow. A faint, sickly luminescence emanated from the vellum, the light reflecting in the grime on the mirrored wall behind me. The symbols pulsed, their meaning twisting, contorting, becoming something other than what I intended. The chanting, the ritual I'd witnessed through the lens, echoed in my mind, a distorted refrain that seemed to originate not from memory, but from the ledger itself. The phrase began to emerge, clear and undeniable, written not in the elegant script of Byzantine scholars, but in a crude, almost childlike hand. Humans are invaders. The words burned themselves into the page, the ink now a searing brand against the vellum. A tremor ran through the floor, a low hum that resonated with the buzzing in my skull. The factory groaned, a sound like a dying beast. The ledger's edges ignited, not with flame but with a cold blue light. The phrase "humans are invaders" flared, the letters glowing with an unnatural intensity. The light spread, consuming the page, then the binding, then the entire ledger. I recoiled, shielding my eyes, the heat intense, the smell acrid. The chalk dust gray of the factory seemed to deepen, to solidify, as if the very air was becoming denser, more oppressive. The fire didn't crackle or pop, it didn't consume with the familiar dance of heat and light. It hissed, a dry rasping sound like 1,000 insects exhaling their last breath. The symbols burned away, leaving behind only a residue of black ash. The phrase, once so clear, was reduced to a scattering of grey dust, which drifted down like a silent snowfall. The buzzing subsided, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. The heat dissipated, leaving behind a bone-chilling cold. I lowered my hand, blinking against the lingering afterimage of the burning symbols. The ledger was gone, vanished as if it had never been. Only the scent of ash remained, a ghostly reminder of what had transpired. I stared at the space where the ledger had been, a profound sense of dread settling upon me. The factory seemed to watch me, the shadows deepening, the silence amplifying. It wasn't just a building, it was a witness, a repository of forgotten secrets. My hand trembled as I reached for the camera, adjusting the focus. The viewfinder showed the same desolate corridor, the same mirrored wall, but something was different. The angles were subtly altered, the shadows deeper, the silence heavier. The mirrored wall shimmered, the grime swirling, forming patterns that weren't there a moment before. I recognized them, not consciously, but instinctively. They were the same glyphs that had been burned into the ledger, the same symbols that had branded the phrase, "humans are invaders," into my mind. The reflection of my face stared back, but it wasn't quite mine. The eyes were wider, the mouth twisted into a mocking grin. A shadow seemed to lurk beneath the surface, a darkness that wasn't my own. The camera clicked, the shutter a sharp, metallic snap in the oppressive silence. The image that appeared on the viewfinder wasn't the corridor, wasn't the mirrored wall. It was a landscape. A vast, alien landscape bathed in the sickly glow of a double sun. Structures rose from the horizon, colossal and geometric, constructed from materials I didn't recognize. And in the distance, figures moved, tall and slender, their forms indistinct, their purpose unknowable. A voice echoed in my mind, not spoken, but felty. A cold alien intelligence probing my thoughts, assessing my worth. It wasn't a command, not precisely, but an observation. A statement of fact. "You were wrong, Mong." The mirror rippled, the reflection dissolving into a swirling vortex of gray and black. A breath, cold and heavy, fogged the surface, obscuring my face. It wasn't my breath. The factory held its breath, waiting. The fire thickened hisses as it consumes the ledger's spine. The snow crunched underfoot, a brittle whisper against the factory's groaning silence. I dragged the toy bear forward, its metal joints protesting with a series of twisty squeaks, tiny, insectile cries in the vast, frozen stillness. Each step was a struggle, the snow deepening with every stride, clinging to my boots like a shroud. The air tasted of something sharp, something almost electrical, a faint tang that scratched at the back of my throat. Chalk dust gray permeated everything, the snow, the sky, the crumbling brick of the factory walls. The bear felt heavy in my grip, a cold metallic weight. I needed to block the vent. The chanting, it was faint, but it persisted, a low thrumming beneath the surface of the silence. The vent exhaled a frigid breath, a whisper of something colder still, something that resonated with a dread coiled tight in my gut. The bear's joints squeaked again, a grating counterpoint to the chanting. The snow around the vent began to melt not into water, but into a slick black puddle. It spread quickly, absorbing the white, leaving behind a stain that seemed to pulse with an unnatural darkness. The factory seemed to watch, the mirrored walls reflecting my distorted image back at me. A mocking echo of my exhaustion. I ignored it, focusing on the task at hand. The bear's head, a crude caricature of a smiling face, began to dissolve. The plastic softened, warped, and dripped, a viscous, oily liquid that mingled with the black puddle. There was no trace of the bear's form, just the residue of its existence, a dark stain spreading across the snow. The chanting intensified, a chorus of voices layered beneath the factory's groans. I pressed onward, the cold seeping into my bones, the taste of that sharp electrical tang growing stronger. My breath plumed out in white clouds, quickly swallowed by the gray expanse. I thought of Ilara, her face a phantom in the periphery of my mind, a memory both vivid and elusive. What had I been chasing? What had I lost? The questions felt like shards of ice piercing my thoughts. Another step, another squeak from the bear's dissolving limbs. The air grew heavier, the pressure building in my ears. I could feel the factory's gaze, a palpable weight on my shoulders. It wasn't a malevolent presence, not precisely, but something, assessing, calculating. The snow continued to melt, the blackness spreading, consuming the white. It felt deliberate, purposeful. The chanting was almost overwhelming now, a discordant symphony of voices that seemed to claw at my sanity. I could feel a tremor in the ground, a subtle vibration that resonated with the buzzing in my skull. It wasn't painful, not yet, but it was unsettling, a disruption. The factory's silence was a lie, a carefully constructed facade masking something ancient and unknowable. I reached the vent, shoving the dissolving remains of the bear into the opening. The blackness clung to the metal, a greasy film that shimmered in the faint light. I could almost feel it reaching, probing. The chanting seemed to originate from within the vent itself, a chorus of voices whispering secrets I wasn't meant to hear. My hand trembled as I pulled the bear's remaining limb free. It was nothing more than a viscous sludge now, a dark, shapeless mass that clung to my fingers. I wiped it onto the snow, the blackness spreading further, consuming the white. The factory's mirrored walls seemed to ripple, the reflections distorting, twisting. I didn't dare look directly at them. The chanting reached a crescendo, a wave of sound that threatened to shatter my eardrums. I pressed my hands against my temples, trying to block it out, trying to silence the voices. The taste of that sharp, electrical tang intensified, burning my tongue. The snow beneath my feet grew slicker, the blackness spreading faster, consuming everything in its path. I wanted to turn back, to flee the factory, to escape the chanting, the cold, the darkness. But something held me rooted to the spot, a sense of obligation, a compulsion I couldn't understand. The factory was waiting. It was observing. It was expecting. The bear was gone, completely dissolved. No trace of its plastic form remained, only the spreading stain of blackness on the snow. The vent exhaled a frigid breath, a whisper of something colder still. The chanting subsided, leaving behind a ringing silence that was more oppressive than any sound. The factory held its breath. The toy bear twin dissolves into the snow. The hum vibrated through my bones, resonating like a heartbeat in time with the generator's rhythm. Blood streaked the metal casing, a dark tracery that seemed to pulse against the chalk dust gray of everything else. I could feel it. The factory's breath held captive within this machine, waiting for release. My hands were slick on the wrench, sweat mingling with oil and blood. The tool slipped from my grasp, clattering onto the floorboards with a sound like distant thunder. Each strike against the generator casing echoed through me, reverberating in time with that relentless heartbeat. It was as if I could hear every nut, bolt, and screw crying out under duress. The factory seemed to watch, its mirrored walls reflecting my distorted image back at me ad infinitum. The reflections were fractured, twisted by the convex glass of the broken windows, their jagged edges like teeth bared in a silent scream. It was unnerving how they shifted, how they seemed to move when I wasn't looking. The cat stood sentinel nearby, its shadow-like silhouette barely discernible against the gloom. Its eyes were two pinpricks of blue flame, burning with an intensity that felt almost hateful. But it offered no comfort, only a grim vigilance as if awaiting some inevitable outcome. It was my anchor here, yet I couldn't help but feel we were both adrift in this frozen desolation. My breath misted the air, each exhale visible against the chill emanating from the generator core. The cold seemed to bite deeper with every strike of the wrench, gnawing at me like a physical thing. It felt alive, hostile almost, as if the factory itself was trying to drive me away. The blood on the casing began to bubble, frothing and hissing like acid eating into metal. I recoiled from it, but there was nowhere to go except deeper into this labyrinthine structure. The cat's eyes seemed to widen in warning, or perhaps anticipation. I struck harder, driven by an almost primal urge to destroy this thing that dared defy me with its pulsing heartbeat. The wrench slammed against the glass casing again and again until finally it shattered, shards exploding outward like lethal confetti. And there it was, a tiny heart no larger than a pea pulsating within the fractured glass. It throbbed like a living thing, veins of blackness spiderwebbing across its surface. The sight turned my stomach, not with revulsion but with something akin to awe at this alien anatomy beating defiantly in time with mine. The cat moved then, a shadow darting closer to the exposed core. Its eyes blazed brighter as it seemed to study the heart's rhythm, or perhaps communicate with it. The idea sent shivers down my spine despite the heat radiating from the shattered generator casing. Each beat of that tiny heart echoed in my skull like thunderclaps, drowning out all other sound until there was nothing but this relentless pulse pounding through me, consuming everything else. It felt as if time itself had slowed to accommodate its cadence, stretching seconds into eternities. I reached for the pulsating organ, fingers trembling with a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. The cat's eyes bored into mine, warning or encouraging. I couldn't tell which. As my hand closed around it, there was a sudden explosion of sound, metal shrieking, glass splintering, flesh tearing. The heart shattered in my grasp, its tiny form imploding amidst a shower of glass and blood. The generator core exploded simultaneously, sending me hurtling backwards into the mirrored walls with enough force to crack them further. I landed hard on the concrete floorboards, pain lancing through me like lightning strikes. As darkness claimed me, all I could hear was that relentless heartbeat echoing in my mind's eye. Only now it sounded distant, fading, like a grenade pin being pulled. The conveyor belt groaned, a protracted sigh of rusted metal against the silence. It wasn't a silence of absence, but a dense, suffocating thing, layered with the residue of a million manufactured smiles, a million tiny plastic limbs. The buzz, the constant, low thrum that had been the factory's heartbeat, had diminished. Not stopped, but slowed. It was as if the pulse was weakening, drawing back into itself. Now, it was a single insect drumming against the shadow-like silhouette of the cat. Drum, drum, drum. Each pulse resonated in my skull, a physical pressure behind my eyes. The cat didn't move. It simply forty-wassued against the gray expanse of the belt, its eyes 2 points of unwavering obsidian focus. It felt like it was assessing me, cataloging my every tremor, every flicker of doubt. The chalk dust gray of the factory seemed to cling to it, to absorb its form, making it less a creature and more a manifestation of the place itself. It radiated an almost palpable cold, a chill that had nothing to do with the Arctic air seeping through the fractured walls. A hatred distilled and pure emanated from it, and yet I clung to its presence, my anchor. I took a step forward, the concrete floorboards crunching under my boots, the sound echoing strangely in the cavernous space. The insect drumming intensified, vibrating through the cat's form, making it seem to shimmer. It was an unsettling distortion, like heat rising from asphalt on a summer day. I felt a disorientation, a subtle shift in my perception. The factory's layout seemed to subtly alter, the mirrored walls rearranging themselves in my peripheral vision. A trick of the light, or something more. Then, with a suddenness that stole my breath, the cat stepped off the belt. No graceful leap, no fluid movement. It simply ceased to be on the belt, and then it wasn't. It flowed like ink bleeding into water, melting into the snow-covered floor. There was no trace of it. No paw prints, no disturbance in the snow. Just gone. The insect drumming ceased abruptly, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. The sudden absence was more unsettling than its presence had been. The factory felt heavier, the gray more oppressive. The air seemed to thicken, to press against my lungs. I wanted to call out, but the sound caught in my throat, strangled by a sudden, inexplicable fear. What was it? Where did it go? Was it even shreddy? I shuffled forward, my boots sinking into the snow. The air tasted of nothing, a vacuum of sensation. The silence was a physical weight, crushing down on me. I felt exposed, vulnerable, stripped bare. The generator's pulse, though diminished, still resonated, a constant reminder of the unnatural power contained within this place. It was a power that felt hungry. My gaze fell on a discarded toy, a porcelain doll with a cracked face and vacant eyes. Its painted smile seemed mocking, a grotesque parody of joy. I averted my eyes, disgusted. The memories, the fragmented images of the ritual, of the woods, of the camera lens flashed behind my eyelids. I pushed them away, forcing myself to focus on the present, on the cold, gray reality of the factory. The snow beneath my feet began to shift, not a drift, not a settling. It moved, it, coalescing, darkening. It flowed, a viscous black liquid seeping across the concrete floor. It smelled of burnt sugar and something else, something indefinably wrong. The factory's heartbeat quickened, a frantic, desperate pulse. I stared, transfixed, unable to move, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. The gray of the factory seemed to deepen, to absorb the blackness, to become one with it. The snow was not snow anymore. It was something else, something alien. The glass felt cold against my palm, the curvature slick with condensation. I tilted the bottle, the viscous obsidian liquid within sloshing with a sound like oiled stone grinding against itself. It wasn't liquid, not entirely. It held a scream, a preserved echo of something, broken. I uncapped it, a faint hiss escaping, and the air tasted of ash and regret. The scent, acrid and sharp, clung to the back of my throat. The bucket, a dented metal thing salvaged from a pile of discarded parts, sat half-filled with chalk dust. The factory floor was coated in it, a fine gray powder that clung to everything, to my boots, to the air itself. I poured the scream, a slow, deliberate stream, into the dust. It wasn't emerging, not at first. The black pooled, resisted then, surrendered. A crackling began, not a sound of combustion, but of dry parchment tearing, multiplied 1,000-fold. The chalk dust didn't simply absorb the blackness, it became it. The gray deepened, then fractured, lines spreading across the bucket's surface like a spiderweb of ink. The buzzing, that constant, low thrum of the factory seemed to warp, to distort, as if viewed through heat haze. It wasn't diminishing now, but changing, shifting in pitch, the insectile drone becoming more insistent, more frantic. The air itself vibrated, a tangible pressure against my eardrums. The transformation accelerated. The blackness swirled, coalescing, rising from the bucket in a slow, agonizing bloom. It wasn't smoke, not exactly. More like concentrated shadow, a void given form. The texture was wrong, impossibly wrong. It moved with a fluidity that defied physics, the blackness rippling, folding in on itself. The chalk dust, now entirely consumed, seemed to twice with the movement, a high-pitched whine that burrowed into my skull. A shape began to emerge from the swirling darkness, a grotesque parody of a face. No features, not at first, just the suggestion of bone, of hollow sockets, of a gaping maw. It wasn't constructed, it was civi remembered, as if the darkness was dredging up a forgotten archetype from the deepest recesses of my mind. The gray of the factory seemed to press in, to constrict, the walls closing in around me, the ceiling lowering. The generator's pulse, now erratic and feverish, felt like a frantic heartbeat mirroring the growing form. The face solidified, a mask of anguish, the features contorting in a silent scream. It wasn't a human face, not entirely. There was something avian about the bone structure, a predatory sharpness to the jawline. The surface wasn't smooth, but textured, covered in microscopic fissures like cracked porcelain. The chalk dust, now integrated into the face's very composition, seemed to flake off, drifting down like ash. The buzzing intensified, resolving into a chorus of whispers, too faint to decipher yet undeniably present. It stared at me, that monstrous visage, and I felt a coldness bloom in my chest, a creeping paralysis that stole the breath from my lungs. It wasn't looking twenty me, not in the conventional sense. It was looking front through me, dissecting my thoughts, stripping away my defenses. The disorientation deepened, the factory's layout shifting, the mirrored walls bending, distorting my reflection into a grotesque caricature. The face opened its mouth, a black void within the blackness, and a sound escaped, not a cry, not a shout, but a tearing. The air itself seemed to rip, the sound of wet parchment being violently shredded. It wasn't audible, not exactly. It resonated within my bones, a physical vibration that shattered my teeth, rattled my skull. The face didn't speak with vocal cords, but with the tearing of reality itself. You should have stayed silent. The voice wasn't a voice, but an imprint, a psychic residue left on my consciousness. It tasted of dust and decay, of forgotten languages and broken promises. The factory's heartbeat stuttered, then stopped altogether, plunging the space into an absolute suffocating silence. The black face, the swirling darkness, everything seemed to hold its breath, waiting. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but stand there, paralyzed, staring into the abyss. But I couldn't. I was trapped, caught in the gaze of something ancient, something malevolent, something that had waited a very long time. The chalk dust settled, coating everything in a fine gray shroud, and the screaming, tearing face began to grow. The historian, that's what he was, or Tiny was. The realization hit with the force of a physical blow, a sickening lurch in my gut. The face, still screaming silently, wasn't just an image dredged from some forgotten corner of my mind. It was a memory, a record my own. The blackness pulsed, and for a fraction of a second I saw a tebby sterile chamber, gleaming metal, the cold precision of observation. Then, it was gone, swallowed by the oppressive gray of the factory. The buzzing escalated, morphing, resolving into something far more precise. A metallic click-click, a sound that resonated not just in my ears, but in my teeth, in the marrow of my bones. It was the sound of a pin being pulled, a grenade pin. The air vibrated not with a tremor, but with a tightening coil of anticipation. My hands, slick with a cold sweat, moved almost of their own volition. They reached up towards the base of my neck. I saw it then, a small circular device embedded in my flesh, almost seamless. A relic of something. The historian's voice echoing within my skull, a detached clinical observation, the temporal anchor, a necessary precaution. They weren't certain of the stability of your return. The anchor. It was why I felt so displaced. Why the memories of this place, of this swinty time, felt both alien and intimately familiar. The buzzing intensified, a swarm of insects drilling into my skull. It wasn't painful, not exactly. It was overwhelming, a pressure that threatened to shatter my sanity. The screaming face grew larger, closer, its porcelain fissures seeming to widen, to breathe. The chalk dust, still falling, coated my skin, my hair, a fine gray shroud. I could taste it, a gritty bitterness on my tongue. Hatred, it wasn't a feeling, not anymore. It was a fundamental state of being, a constant hum beneath the surface of my thoughts, a visceral rejection of this place, this time, this existence. I focused on that hatred, let it fuel my movements. My fingers tightened around the pin, the metal cold and unforgiving against my skin. The historian's voice, colder now, almost dismissive. You were meant to observe, to record, not to interfere. Interference. That was the problem, wasn't it? The historian, the future me, had become entangled, involved, human. The factory itself seemed to be holding its breath. The mirrored walls reflecting the screaming face, reflecting 20 my, a distorted, fragmented image of despair. The generator's erratic pulse felt like a mocking laughter. I could almost feel the weight of countless eyes upon me, unseen, unblinking. The face shifted, its features subtly rearranging, as if struggling to comprehend my actions. It wasn't malicious, not in the conventional sense. It was perplexed, a flicker of something akin to pity crossed its porcelain surface. The historian's voice, a whisper now, almost lost in the buzzing committee. It's irreversible. The cascade will begin. You can't stop it. But I could end it. I could end with this if the metallic click was sharper now, more resonant. The pin yielded with a faint scraping sound. A jolt, a sudden, searing pain that radiated outwards from my neck, a cold fire consuming me from the inside out. The screaming face warped, distorted, its features blurring into a chaotic mess of black and gray. The buzzing peaked, a deafening crescendo that threatened to rupture my eardrums. The factory dissolved, not collapsed, not shattered, but 2 feet dissolved. The walls melted, the floor flowed, the ceiling vanished. I was suspended in a void, a swirling vortex of gray and black, the screaming face my only point of reference. The historian's voice, fading now, a final, detached observation, a paradox, a closed loop, an anomaly. I didn't fight it, didn't resist. Didn't even try and think. There was only the pain, the cold fire, the swirling vortex, and the overwhelming sense of release. The hatred remained, a lingering ember in the dying embers of my consciousness. A final, defiant act of rejection. I pulled. My fingers closed around the cat's shadow, a void where fur should be, cold and yielding like damp ash. It didn't resist, just what was said a silhouette dissolving into the Inkwell surface. The historian's voice, a dry rasp in my skull, whispered, "The anchor requires sacrifice. The temporal stability depends on the cat's mortality." As I didn't question it, hatred burned brighter than logic, a furnace in my chest. The cat's shadow pulsed faintly, a dark echo of its own heartbeat. I pushed. Not a shove, but a sinking, the shadow vanishing into the bottle's black throat with a wet throat, like a stone dropped into deep water. The buzzing stopped. Instantly, the swarm of insects drilling into my skull ceased, leaving a vacuum that felt like cotton stuffed in my ears. Then, hump, a single heavy thump inside the inkwell. Not a sound, but a vibration in my teeth, a physical pressure against my ribs. A slow, deliberate funty thumpy. Inside the bottle. The inkwell shuddered, the glass surface rippling like a pond disturbed by a stone. Then, for deep pop, a sharp, wet thumpy pop. As the bottle's seal gave way, black chalk dust erupted from the inkwell, not in a spray but in a thick, viscous wave, like ink bleeding from a wound. It coated my face gritty, cold, the taste of chalk and despair on my tongue. I blinked, and the dust clung to my eyelashes, a fine grey shroud. The dust didn't fall, it coalesced, swirling in the air above my face like a living thing, drawn by the proximity of the screaming face still lingering in my mind. I felt it heard it through the grit between my teeth, a low resonant thumper from the inkwell. Now a steady drumming rhythm. Thump, thump, thump. Thump. The cat's heart beating inside the bottle, beating against the glass, beating into my very bones. The dust rose higher, swirling in a tight, dark spiral above my eyes. It wasn't falling. It was soon gathering, as if drawn by the heartbeat. I could feel it on my skin, a cold, wet pressure, like the touch of a grave. My eyes stung with the grit, but I couldn't blink. The dust swirled faster, tighter, forming a dense, heavy ring around my vision. It wasn't just dust anymore. It was the chalk from the blackboard, the chalk from the factory walls, the chalk from the screaming face's porcelain skin. It was the fidey memory of the factory. The thump inside the inkwell grew louder, a deep, resonant thump-thup that vibrated the floor beneath my feet, thump, thump, thump. The dust swirled faster, forming a dense, impenetrable curtain over my eyes. I could feel it, thick, heavy, cold, the taste of chalk sharp on my tongue. The dust pressed against my eyelids, a final, suffocating embrace. It wasn't falling, it was side-settling in, coalescing into a single, seamless layer of black chalk dust, covering my eyes completely. The thump from the inkwell slowed, then stopped. The dust remained a perfect, solid circle of grey-black. Covering my vision, I could no longer see the factory, the screaming face, the blackboard. Only the dust, only the silence, only the taste of chalk, only the taste of chalk, only the funthu that had been, and was no longer. The dust coalesced over Jude's eyes.